Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's panel webinar on accelerating collective learning and action for enhanced climate resilience. Today's webinar is part of a monthly series, but will feature a slightly different panel discussion format, which we piloted during our April panel webinar on living shorelines. Before we get started today, we'll give a bit of background on the reserve system and the premise of the webinar series. All of our panelists today either work for or have partnered with one of the reserves in this system, so it might help to start with a quick primer. The National Estuarine Research Reserve System, or NERRS, is a network of 29 unique research reserves as shown on this map. This is a NOAA program that works in collaboration with the local place-based partner, either a state agency, university, or nonprofit. Each reserve site includes programs focused on land stewardship, research, and scientific monitoring training programs for the public and local officials, and education. The Neuroscience Collaborative hosts this webinar series and is one of the research funding mechanisms for the reserve system. In addition to providing grants, we also work to promote the great research and engagement happening across the reserve system through our Collaborative Science for Estuaries webinar series. Before we get started with the panel, we'd like to get a better sense for who is with us today by asking a couple quick polling questions, so please respond when you see the poll at your screen. It's interesting. We have a lot of people who actually haven't heard about the NERRS today. That's always fun to have some new faces and new ears listening in. Well, do another quick poll question here real quick. And we're just trying to get a sense for who's with us in the audience today. And you should be able to select multiple ones here, so please select whichever ones you think best describe your organization. Pretty nice split of government and university people here today. So it looks like we have a couple people from nonprofits and for-profit organizations as well. Okay, so we'll move forward into a couple of quick housekeeping items. Due to the large audience we have with us today, you are muted upon entry, and we will be handling questions via the question feature on the GoToWebinar console down there shown by the little arrow. If you have a question for us, just type it in and it'll stay in the chat and we'll be able to access it. So we will answer you via text usually in that console as well. Questions will be saved for the Q&A portion of the webinar, but we encourage you to submit your questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar to make it a little bit easier on us. You can send us your questions by entering them in the questions field in the console. With that, I will introduce our moderator for today. Our moderator is Susie Moser, who brings deep expertise and a unique perspective for today's topic. Susie has been leading efforts to identify helpful approaches for selecting and tracking indicators, including vulnerability, sustainability, and ecological health. A geographer by training, Susie has contributed in multiple capacities to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Her work in the reserve system supports participating reserves, often in collaboration with nearby coastal communities, in developing indicators and metrics of successful adaptation to climate change. I'll let Susie provide a little more framing for today's topic and then introduce our panelists. Susie, thanks for being here today. I'll hand it over to you now.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nick, and welcome to everyone for joining us for this webinar today. There are over 180 registered folks for this webinar. It tells us something about what's on everyone's mind. So thank you for that interest. And I'm just delighted to have my colleagues here with whom I've worked, many of you have worked over the years, to share some of the lessons that they've learned in the work with coastal communities, on the reserves and beyond them, on adaptation. But I want to start, and maybe Nick, you can just go to the next slide while we're showing the overview of the agenda that we have planned for today. I just want to say a word about why did we choose this topic. all of us have a sense of climate change is accelerating and adaptation is not progressing fast enough to actually get us prepared and ready for those impacts that are coming. And so we were thinking quite a bit about what can we do to help accelerate our own learning and sharing that with others and hopefully move us more quickly to action. So, you know, we're jumping in on the learning curve a little bit higher and maybe get to action faster. So, you know, the NERRS is an incredible, if you will, laboratory or experiment around the nation where they work with local communities to try to develop plans and put in place new innovative ideas of how to adapt and what can we learn from those projects and share that with all of you and be in conversation of other ideas that you might have of how to accelerate our own learning. So it's really a two-way thing, but we want to do that by first introducing what the project work is that each of them brings, and then be a little bit in conversation about that with teasing out those lessons learned, and then actually opening up to you for a good 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes before we close. So that's the overview. And with that, I want to basically not spend a lot of time running through the bios of these very accomplished people. You have received them in the invitation to this webinar. They're going to be on the NERRS Science Collaborative website. But I'm going to ask each of you on this panel to introduce yourselves in a very brief way by just basically saying, you know, who you're with, where are you based, and what are some of the projects that you're bringing, if you will, to the table today. But before we go to that, why don't you shift to the next slide, Nick? I want to just get a sense, one more question, polling question from the audience about where you are at with climate adaptation. Which statement best describes your own interest in this? And that'll help us inform some of the conversations that we have. So if you just want to answer this one, just pick your highest priority interest. I'm sure you have more. So just take maybe a couple more seconds here. How deep in this topic are you yourself? And Nick, you see the answers coming in, so you tell us when we're ready for answers. So lots of you have already helped implement climate planning or adaptation projects. You're involved in research about adaptation. More of you are just interested in it and want to learn more about it and are interested in how to accelerate learning. Yeah, don't we all? So thank you for that feedback. And with that, Lisa, I want to start with you. If you go to the next slide, Nick, and maybe just put up Lisa's slide. If you want to introduce yourself, just 2 minutes, where are you based and what are you bringing to the table today?
Yeah, thank you, Susie. I am the Assistant Manager and Coastal Training Program Coordinator at the Jacques Cousteau National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is located in southern New Jersey. We're about 20 minutes north of Atlantic City area. And I have been working on a variety of resilience and climate adaptation projects really prior to Sandy, but really getting into planning and implementation here in New Jersey post-Sandy. A couple of the projects I've worked on are highlighted on the slide with my photo, but one of them, we had a very exciting milestone today, releasing a new updated version of a sea level rise and flood mapping website in New Jersey. And another one of the projects I've worked on as part of a NERRS Science Collaborative funding is a risk communication project, really trying to understand people's mental models, understand where they're at with risk, and try to help decision makers on the ground in New Jersey really know better how to communicate about risk and have more confidence in doing it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Philip, I want to go to you next, and we're just on that side of the coast. If you could share a little bit about yourself and what you're doing there.
Sure. I'm an oceanographer, and I specialize in physical processes in estuaries in the coastal ocean, as well as, especially after Hurricane Sandy hit us, as well as hazards like storm surges and sea level rise. and I work at Stevens Institute in Hoboken, New Jersey, across the river from New York City. So with 20 million people around us in the metro area. After Hurricane Sandy, I was really motivated and disappointed that I saw so much happening, but not a lot of role for academic science. And with the Corps of Engineers studies or FEMA studies, and often I had criticisms of them and there was no mechanism other than public comment to get it out. And now along this particular project along that I have funded with NERRS partners and NERRS Science Collaborative is evaluating a Corps of Engineers and New York State, New York City, New Jersey collaborative project looking at what to do about coastal flooding in the region. And it includes storm surge barriers. The title of the project is Assessing the Effects of Storm Surge Barriers on the Hudson River Estuary. Storm surge barriers are gated, barrier systems that can be open during calm weather. So they're typically open except for maybe once a year, theoretically, when there's a storm. And so there's concern definitely from the NERRS site on the Hudson River that this could interfere with circulation of the estuary, with water quality, with marshes, tidal marshes, et cetera. So the goal in this project is to bring more science into the Corps of Engineers process and work alongside the Corps of Engineers and have workshops and research and try to improve the scientific basis for their study.
Great, thank you, Philip. Let's jump to the other end of the country. Sabrina, what's happening in Alaska? What are you doing?
Thanks, Susie. My name is Sabrina Benson. I'm the Coastal Training Program Coordinator at the Kachemak Bay NERR up here in Alaska. It's the only subarctic NERR, so we have our own specific suite of impacts and issues that my recent projects with the NERRS Science Collaborative started with facilitating adaptation planning for coastal communities in Alaska through a transfer of scenario planning techniques from Tijuana River NERR in partnership with Susie and the Successful Adaptation Indicators and Metrics Project. And just briefly, through that process, we developed a better understanding of how our communities are coping with the variety of impacts related to a warming climate here. And these conversations really inspired new lines of inquiry for Kachemak Bay NERR to meet the needs of people and what they're facing here. Our new projects, we've got one about establishing a kind of a baseline budget for groundwater, because we don't really have a great understanding of what those resources look like, as well as exploring carbon projects and carbon mitigation projects here in peat wetlands. And also on the screen, there's a title, Promoting Coastal Community Resilience Through Alaska Fisheries Business Self-Assessments. That's a recent stakeholder engagement project with the Science Collaborative, where we developed a local business self-assessment for commercial fishermen, which was really great. And we learned a lot from them too, and how they were already adapting in their business practices and how we could better support their fisheries with our science.
Great, thank you, that's great. And Stuart, to you in California, what are you doing there?
Hi, thanks, Susie. My name is Stuart Siegel. I'm the Coastal Resilience Specialist for the San Francisco Bay NERR. In my background, I'm a wetland scientist. I've been doing wetlands restoration and coastal adaptation projects and planning and policy for about the past 35 years. And for those folks who might be familiar with San Francisco Bay, this is a region rich in folks trying to tackle the issue of sea level rise adaptation in a variety of different ways. And then California also links a lot of this work to wildfire risk, but these things have a lot of climate change related risks in California. And so one of the projects that the Research Reserve is working on is in our local, one of our two reserves, we have roads that go right through the tidal marshes in the system. And the picture you folks can see in the background is that on king tides and during winter floods, these kinds of roads go underwater and either people drive through them, as this picture shows, or they close the road. And in some of these instances, these are either alternate or significant transportation corridors, as well as very significant wildlife areas. And there's been some work in the region in actually implementing adaptation projects, but we're really at the stage of very significant planning. And as we get closer and closer to implementation, things get more challenging because you actually get down to grading the road and try to put something in the ground. And in many ways, similar to what Philip was speaking about back on the East Coast, is what does it mean when you actually try to put projects on the ground, and how would you actually make those function and really work with a variety of stakeholders and interests in these areas.
That's great. Thank you so much. And what an exciting range of projects. I just took myself some notes. I mean, it ranges from mapping risks, assessing risks, to communicating risks, planning, implementation, scenario planning you mentioned, assessing the solutions that might be out there, and then evaluating whether or not they're working. So it's really covering that full adaptation cycle, if you will. And it also seems to address all the different stakeholders, from individuals, businesses in the private sector, local communities, federal agencies, state agencies. So it's really an incredible collaborative effort that you often are engaged in. And what we want to do next is kind of pull out some of the lessons that you feel like you've come across or you've learned from your projects. And maybe we can just sort of start with that. What have you learned about initiating these new climate adaptation efforts, engaging new partners, ensuring that the communication is going well? Should we start? Sabrina, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in with some lessons learned from starting new adaptation planning through workshops here in Alaska. And one thing I found that you may write a small grant or a large grant to start planning, to start facilitating a process, but occasionally there can be a mismatch between political will and financial resources for adaptation planning and action, especially in a low regulatory environment or maybe a limited human and financial resources capacity environment. So one lesson that I would just love to share with everybody who's really working towards this bigger adaptation planning is to be prepared for that mismatch of political or financial or human resources when embarking on longer term projects and plans, especially with turnover in elected and appointed officials or turnover of staff at your partner agencies that you're working with.
Sabrina, can you just say another word? What does it mean to be prepared for that mismatch? I mean, how do you, knowing that is one thing, right? But what do you actually do?
So what we ended up doing is thinking a little bit more creatively about incorporating adaptation strategies into routine planning processes like comprehensive plan, capital improvement plan, hazard mitigation planning, things that communities are already required to do, instead of trying to develop a whole new climate adaptation plan for our community and region. I think that there's a little bit more political will for that now than there was 4 years ago when we started this process. But I think it's really worthwhile having these kind of community conversations, identifying adaptation strategies, and really being creative about how you can deploy those strategies. Are there different processes out there than maybe the one that you initially had in mind to go forward with?
So be quite flexible and probably demand some flexibility on the funder side too, right? If you apply for one thing and then they're not quite ready for that. But a lot of prep work. I wonder, Lisa, if since you have focused on communication per se, you could chime in a little bit on this one too, lessons you've learned about really good communication of the risks that we're facing and building up to good engagement.
Yeah, I want to build off of something Sabrina just said in regards to turnover at the local level, especially with longer term projects. The group of folks that you meet with that are your stakeholders, maybe even planning committee members for a project might not be the same faces you're seeing 2 or 3 years later. So I think that's an important consideration in this work, because doing this work well means it takes a while, actually. I think that's one thing that's a lesson learned. Secondly, one thing that I've seen works well in projects, especially where you have so many different stakeholders with different perspectives and perceptions and maybe and desired outcomes, is take the time up front in projects to go through a visioning process. Make sure people can hear what each other feels is important, make sure what each other knows what they want to protect or what type of function, make them all see that while they come at it from different angles, there are things they do share in common, and that's really important to recognize if they're going to be a group that's working together in the long term and maybe will have differing opinions over time. So to the extent to which you can get consensus on a vision or function for an area, or even a shared commonality in what's important to folks, I think those are always good platforms to start from, and then work your way to different solutions and input from that starting point, that same common starting point.
Yeah, I know, Stuart, you have had that same topic to deal with. So do you want to speak to this as well?
I was just taking note about reiterating what Lisa just had to say there. It resonates very strongly. Is in our effort at China Camp State Park, one of the things that Lisa mentioned there is this idea of early visioning. We went through that process, and one of the things that we discovered is how we language that kind of visioning, what we end up with, because there's a push on some people's part to be very general, encompassing, and open, and anything is kind of possible, more or less. And what we discovered is the more general we were with things, the more people interpreted that generality in their own very unique ways. When it came down to the time to start applying them, people's very different understandings and interpretations popped up, and we got stuck. And that led us back to, in many ways, repeating that process and going back and being very concrete and very specific and really capturing everyone's ideas and allowing those different interests and perspectives to be shared and open, and arriving at a place where we're very specific with where we're trying to go with this whole effort. And once we got that done, then we're able to really move forward in that shared understanding. Even if folks didn't agree with everything, had different perspectives, at least they saw what people were talking about and very clear about that. And that was a significant breakthrough to be able to keep moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? That in some ways you can bring in more people when you're more general and, hand wavy about the future, but it comes kind of back to haunt you later if you're not really specific about what you want to achieve. Well, this is great. It's a wonderful start. I want to dig a little bit deeper into, so, imagine now you have these projects launched. All of you have lived through years of running projects, being involved as a stakeholder, being involved as a facilitator or as a participant. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to lessons you've learned about pitfalls. Like what are the kinds of things that happen, surprises, unexpected events, and how in the world did you deal with them? Because that happens in every project, right? But they could be positive opportunities and negative detractions. So I wonder if, I don't know, Philip, you want to start with that one and tell us a little bit about what happened with the Army Corps and working in that context?
Sure. Even before getting our project started, we had the pitfall of just engineers and scientists don't always speak the same language, and engineers and scientists don't have the same vision of of the future necessarily, and so we had to build trust right off the bat in writing our proposal to the NERRS Science Collaborative, and had the Corps of Engineers look at it, and because they're running this massive study, looking at tens of billions of dollars of expenditures for any kind of solution, be it wall, protection on shore fronts or out in the estuary. So we had to build their trust, and because we wouldn't be doing much if we were just talking amongst ourselves and not interacting with the Corps in the project. So that was a challenge, and it took some effort to build that trust. What was going on in the background at the time was, pretty much sort of a yelling match between environmental community and the Corps of Engineers. Well, the Corps of Engineers was just on the defensive, and there really wasn't, and that was in the media, really dominating the media. And so not a lot was being learned among the general public to just hear sort of less scientific arguments and concerns. So we got involved, and we had to earn that trust, and that took a lot of effort. And so the reward for that is, so the surprise is that in the long run, now we feel like we're sort of entrained in that study, and we have scientists. We're bringing in scientists from USGS, Woods Hole from the Netherlands and the UK for a science workshop this Friday. So we're really, and we, once in a while we step back and we say, are we doing things right, or are we really doing this right? But it's like, wait, it seems like if we really think about what's happening, we're already having an influence even without these workshops and things. Just the Corps of Engineers is acting, I think, probably acting a little bit differently just because we're part of the process.
Can I follow up on one thing you just said? We say this so often about building trust. Every single one of us knows that and has heard that. What does that actually mean? How do you build trust? Especially when the situation is not just you're unfamiliar, but there's a conflict and there's, visible differences in approach.
In this case, it's about having them see us as either completely objective, or at least, you know, rooted in the science. You know, I think that's the key. I mean, but that's a challenge. I mean, I wrote too many editorials in past years about what shouldn't be done with protecting the world from sea level rise and such, and so they could go Google me online and see that I was criticizing storm surge barriers, or at least saying let's do small things first. And so that's what it required, is showing that we were going to be rooted in science, and that we were, and that's actually something they want. I think that's the thing we learn is, you know, the head of this study is just as concerned as I am, or the environmental community is, that some governor someday is going to misuse this barrier and turn the Hudson into more of a lagoon than an estuary. You know, he was actually concerned about that, and you know, so I think once we're all talking about these things together, then you start to realize you see maybe have some of the same concerns, even if the outcome of your organization might not be the same outcome. At least we have the same concerns. So.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Rooting in the same concerns and maybe finding common values and shared beliefs. Lisa, I wonder if you want to chime in on this too, either on the trust building or maybe the surprises, pitfalls, any of those topics. What are some lessons that you've stumbled into, whether you wanted to or not?
I actually think I can weave a nice tale of a pitfall that speaks to trust building eventually. I think one common pitfall is to gain input from stakeholders and mean to gain their input very sincerely, want it to be an open discussion, want people to be able to have their opinion heard, but then not really do a whole lot with it. Kind of check the box that we got input, but then not really do anything about it. I think that can be a common pitfall, and certainly can ruin a stakeholder-based process around adaptation planning. But I think when you do have a group of stakeholders that you've worked with for a while, and you have their trust, they understand, like Philip said, you're coming from a place of neutrality, of just wanting to facilitate a conversation. I think that you can be sincere, set up a process that not only gains input and feedback, but then make sure you build in the time to follow up on that feedback, build in the time to work whatever suggestions came out of that trustful place where you got people's feedback, and build it into the next iteration or the next scenario version or the next part of the project, because there's nothing worse about losing trust than we wanted your opinion and then we did nothing about it, or we just checked the box on the process. So I think don't fall into the pitfall of we did it, we checked the box, and now we're moving on. I think building in the time and the place and the resources to really, really let people know that you did something with what they care about. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know, Stuart, you had another example that I think would be worth airing. So would you want to share your progress or pitfall?
So it really follows nicely from these prior comments. So, and trust is a key part of it. So we have this thing called unfamiliarity of the process. So what we try to do, and it's been tried elsewhere, is very much a community participation process. And so folks have expert guidance and expert leadership along the way, but it's really to engage the community. And a lot of those folks aren't used to that and haven't seen the process, and you need to be very methodical, as both Lisa and I mentioned before, about really that early visioning and goal setting process, and not moving forward until you have that done. And you have to allow trust in the process and the folks leading that process to make that happen. And that once the folks, when our process, we got to the end, everyone was extremely happy. Along the way, they got a little bumpy and a little friction there because they weren't used to this kind of process we're following. And it really led us to, we lost a big chunk of time having to go backwards, both to redo some pieces to get that kind of early vision and goals very clear in everybody's mind, and then allow the key partners, you know, in the case of our research reserve, State Parks owns the park, the county owns the road, there's mistrust there, there's some unfamiliarity. And part of that trust process, which I think people really saw borne out in the end, is that you do what you say you're going to do, and you actually follow through, and you do it in a very transparent way. And and allow people to see how you're going about it. And that, by the end, we had built incredible trust and some new relationships that really overcame that sort of, in a way, almost a fear of the process. Switching from a nice, wonderful, abstract planning process to, we're going to design a project that's going to get built. We need to get into the nitty gritty here. And it's to take people to come along and handle their different perspectives on what might be okay and not okay.
Yeah, it's a really important point and comes back to this question of communication too. I mean, how do you keep everyone involved? I want to come back to that question of how to keep going through often lengthy projects and processes like you all describe. But before I do that, I want to just encourage people, if you do have questions to any one of the speakers or to the whole panel, please put them into the comment box and we'll collect them and we'll get to them in a few minutes. And also, if you haven't noticed, Lynn has sent some links to some of the projects and resources that people have just talked about in the chat box as well. So you can actually download them there and also get what we call the management briefs, a summary of some of these projects that each of our panelists have been involved in. We have prepared a draft of that, and that will be updated after this panel today. So, but let's come back to this topic of how you keep going, maintaining momentum through what become often very bureaucratic, very tedious, and very technical issues over time. It's just really challenging. And I think we have enough time for each of you to maybe speak to that if you have a good example from your particular project. So Sabrina, do you want to start? I just saw your slight hot head nod, so I might just start with you. Any lessons on how to maintain momentum?
Yeah, and one thing I was just thinking about having these longer term projects is in maintaining momentum is they're really an opportunity to develop deeper relationships with partners. For the fisheries business self-assessment project that we just completed, we transferred a tool from the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Consortium, and we worked with our local Alaska Sea Grant office here, so it really helped, like a long-term iterative process, helped deepen our relationship with our Sea Grant program as well. And we also found that we have many more stakeholders in our commercial fishermen than we expected, and we've really been kind of establishing more trust with those user groups as well, of those user groups of information. And they've become more like ambassadors for science and ambassadors for habitat, which was kind of an unexpected outcome through this process. So I think I feel like it is a long haul sometimes, but it's about the journey and it's about developing those relationships. So that's kind of what keeps me going in these longer term projects. Great.
Philip, can I call on you too? When I hear U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or federal bureaucracy, it takes typically a few minutes to get something done. I wonder what lessons you're learning about sustaining momentum and keeping people in processes that can just be very tedious and lengthy and challenging.
Well, it's a real big challenge for somebody in my shoes because I'm a research professor who has 2-year contracts and has to raise all my funding via grants. But there's one place where I've had that, and that's through NOAA RISA funding, NOAA's RISA program. And we have it's Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments, and they're 5-year long projects basically for providing climate services, or weather or climate related services to government and stakeholders. And so I'm a member of New York City Panel on Climate Change. And that group, which is started by Bill Selecki and Cynthia Rosenzweig, they managed, in spite of changing mayors and all these things, they've managed about 10 years now, more than 10 years now, of 3 or 4 cycles of repeating reports. Every 3 years we have a report. And now that's mandated by the city government, although there's no funding from the city government. It's mandated that will continue. And then, even with our floods, so for example, the chapter I've been involved with the past 6 years is flood risk and sea level rise. And so we put out a new report every 3 years or so. And they are using the cities even, so one of the successful components is every month we have, in 2-year blocks, basically, we have meetings with the city. And so it's like Sabrina said, we have this ongoing, repeated, just reliable interaction over a decade now. And so now some of the flood hazard projections are being used for experimentally for zoning for the city, definitely for planning. There's some neighborhoods that are special flood risk areas that are not going to be have an increasing population by the city, so they're actually acting with these flood maps and using our results. So, and I think the key there is just having some really good, having some long-term funding, having really good leadership that knows how to have a process that works, and just being in touch again and again and again reliably, I think.
Great. Lisa, just being specific about sort of what you're learning in some of the projects that you're working on, what are some of the ingredients specifically in what you've done, whether it's that mapping project or, your risk communication? What have you learned about sort of how to keep going over time?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing I just want to say in relation to what Sabrina and Phil said was sometimes you are going to lose people, and that's just the way it is, and that's reality. And in that process, sometimes you gain some really great new people too. So I think there's a flip side to that works out well. I've often found what works really effectively for me, and I don't mean to be repetitive, but just being really sincere in the fact that you're asking people for their input so that you can help them help themselves. So when we're developing or facilitating the development of a regional resilience plan for a part of a county, we don't want to develop a plan that's going to sit on a shelf. We're developing the plan, we're facilitating the development of the plan for them. So they need to be able to see their own vision in it, see their own priorities in it, make their own trade-offs, what's important to them versus what is it okay if that function, gets moved to a different area. So I think sincerity and making sure that whatever role you play, the people who are going to use what you are developing or what you're facilitating, making sure they understand it. Without their involvement, they don't own it. They need to own it and be involved for it to actually be used and be useful to them. So to me, those are a couple key points.
Yeah. Stuart, any last comments from your side? I don't know. Do you have champions? Do you have, more money than the rest of us? Like, what keeps you guys going?
Well, I'm not sure we have more money or not. That's always an interesting question. One of my observations over the years is I've been involved doing things like this for 35 years, and a 10 to 20 year time frame is not uncommon, which is pretty painful. And one of the and in the end, when you're doing projects, when you put something on the ground, every single time there is a project sponsor, be it local government or a nonprofit or whomever is appropriate entity, and they have to get permits to do that. And they need state and federal permits, and there's a regulatory process. And oftentimes having what makes it work are having project champions, local champions, be they local elected officials or public works, community groups. There's a lot of stripes they can come in, and they both need to have that continuity to keep the project moving through processes that can take many years in some instances, while at the same time keeping that public engagement alive and going. And so when you get closer, people remember why they're actually doing this, and at the same time trying to find ways to speed that process up. And so really that idea of that local champion, and the research reserve is an example that they have continuity that can provide that technical foundation and retain a lot of that knowledge and insight, because as Lisa mentioned, and Philip, people keep changing around and you have to re-educate folks. And I've done that many times over the years. And you have to be able to house that knowledge and keep it, be able to bring it back and bring in what's new. And I found that it's a really critical piece to having success here.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in my own experience, I feel like oftentimes it's about communicating that you have achieved interim steps is a really important piece too. Otherwise, to people who just drop into a process once in a while, they might just not see anything moving, right? While there might be very much work going on in some process behind the scenes, but they need to know about that thing, the molecules are actually moving. So I want to move us to the conversation with the folks who have sent in questions. So maybe, I don't know if it's Nick or Lynn, would one of you maybe help us out here, see what's come in and maybe read out some of the questions?
Sure, Susie. Yeah, they're coming in. So our first question relates to building trust, gathering feedback, and following up. So there's a comment and then a question. So some stakeholders expect immediate solutions, but we know this is not possible, especially when it comes to adaptation. How would you address this when we as practitioners cannot provide immediate solutions, even though the hazards are happening now?
Is there one of you who feels called to answer that? Okay, someone.
Well,
okay,
I'll take a
Stuart.
stab at that. I think that the comment is a really good comment to start out with, is that people want to see some action today. And even in our project, we started with a short-term adaptations workshops and a cycle of meetings, and then moved into the long-term. And it created the opportunity to think, what are some of the very near-term things that we could get done? And in this case, the county, which owns the road, has started doing those. They're fixing some culverts, they're increasing warnings about road flooding, using a lot of the more modern social media and other means of alert systems, and really find a list of things they can do in the very near term that kind of hold the ground briefly while you try to work out these longer-term, more challenging projects. And so one strategy is to remember there often can be some short-term steps you can do while you're trying to tackle the longer-term problems.
Yeah, that's great. Let's do this. If one of you has a burning sort of answer to this, why don't you just raise your hand so I can see it? And otherwise, we'll just hear another question. I don't know how many questions you have, but just go ahead and answer another one, or tell us another question.
Okay, I've got another question here, Susie. Question is, how have panelists ensured that the appropriate stakeholders are being engaged? Not just the usual suspects or subjects, who are the easier ones with whom to engage. I'm thinking about First Nations and tribal representatives and other communities of color who are often underrepresented in these conversations.
That's a great one. Serena, can I call on you first for that one? I know you've done a lot of that sort of thing, but then anyone of the rest of you want to, raise your hand later, that's great too. Serena.
Thank you. Yes, I think it really is a challenge to make sure that you are engaging the appropriate people and that you maintain that social equity with adaptation actions and planning. I have relied a lot on our partners and our and collaborative workshops to ask people to really try to recommend if there aren't people in the room that should be there. And that was one of the reasons that we started engaging the commercial fishermen, is because they were going to be impacted by these trends in climate, and they didn't have a seat at the table. And it was really interesting through the focus groups I did with commercial fishermen, is that was one of the lines, the great quotes that I came away with, is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I think that it's really good to rely on your partners and rely on your social networks and professional networks to really, and always be asking that question of your partners. And I think that, as Lisa said, maybe you do lose some stakeholders over the years, or maybe you gain new ones. So I think always asking that question and always trying to think creatively about who has a role to play in adaptation is really important.
Lisa, do you want to speak to this too? Because you have, from the richest to the poorest on the coast and near the coast, and need to develop resilience plans with them. So how do you do that? How do you make sure you got everybody at the table?
Yeah, we have two active projects that I feel like we've done some pretty unique things to engage typically underrepresented groups. One thing in our regional resilience project we've been doing is go-to people. So we wanted to understand what people valued as assets in their community, and this went beyond the fire stations and the hospitals. Like, what, as a member living in the community, was it the bagel store? Was it the school? Was it the town square? And so instead of just sending out a survey or hosting a public open house, knowing that there's a number of community members that might not have the time to get there or are working a second job or don't have childcare to get there, we actually went to community events. So we went to 5 or 6 different community events over the summer, everything from like a classic car show to a market in the downtown to a block party in Red Bank, and interacted with a variety of different people and really just posed the question to them, what matters to you in your community? We're trying to build a resilience plan to protect your community, and we need to know what matters to you so we know how to protect it. So I think going to people is a large part of it. I think the second part is we've often used, going back to that trusted source, while we might not be the trusted source within underrepresented communities, there are social-based organizations that are. And so using those social-based organizations to then be the inner part of a wheel that then can reach out to the different spokes in the wheel to draw their members in as the trusted source. So it's a little bit of a train-the-trainer model where you rely on that community-based organization to be your vehicle to get to the type of folks you want to bring to the table.
Yeah, that's good. Great. Lynn, any other questions?
Sure, I got another question here. How do you move?
Go ahead.
Okay. How do you move forward when the science seems to be slower than the community needs?
One of you want to take that one? Philip, go ahead, and I'll come back to you, Stuart, in a moment. I know you had your hand up too. So. Philip, you first.
Well, we're always, you know, I can follow up on all these questions. I mean, I have a little bit to say about all of them. Definitely, there's a lot of demand in our area after Hurricane Sandy for answers, and I think a lot of what I've been involved with has been, you know, we've also been going into communities in person and sort of trying to be embedded and learn what people want. We just provide what we have available. One of the big problems we have right now is that we don't know if there's going to be these surge barriers built on Jamaica Bay, which is a localized part of New York City, or on the harbor, you know, and people want to make individual adaptation decisions, and so they don't know if they're going to be protected by the government or not. And even if they build those barriers, sea level rise will still creep up and they won't be able to close them to stop tidal flooding. So people are still missing crucial information about how the government's going to respond. But we can show them the different alternative scenarios of the future and try to inform them of that. But it is always a big challenge.
Yeah, Stuart, do you have any suggestion on that question or on the previous one? I saw your hand too late. So
that's fine.
Both.
I'm both, but I'll tackle the second one first. That you know, there's this whole field called adaptive management. And, you know, it's around the idea of moving forward with inadequate information and being very methodical and careful about it. And what we've done a lot in this region that translates that to, a lot of people talk adaptive management and a few actually do it. But the idea of everything that you do is an experiment, and you build as many experiments with each action that you take, but experiments only exist if you go assess them and communicate the results, the findings, and put them to use. Otherwise, they're just things that happen and maybe some data that sits somewhere. And so there's a lot you can learn by doing pilot projects and so forth. And as long as the outcomes of those, there's always a time frame question of how long they take to show results, but getting those experiments built into your actions and extracting the knowledge out of them and feeding it back into the system is a super critical piece on that. On the prior question, about really getting folks engaged, one of the things that we found was really critical is, and Lisa kind of touched on this, is when you go out to the community, you have to figure out what it takes to get them to be able to show up. And that can be childcare, that can be food, that can be translators. It's really understand the different communities you have and what it takes for them to be successful to engage. And there's a bit of legwork to understand what that looks like. And then as many folks I'm sure have encountered, when it comes to paying for food, the government has a very difficult time, you know, buying, you know, snacks and drinks and sandwiches, and figure out a solution. Maybe you have a nonprofit partner or somebody or business that will pay for those kinds of things. And it's a really critical piece that makes an enormous difference to get in the community to be involved in everything that we're doing. In the Bay Area, we have tribes in California, and we have a state law that, as well as federal law, mandates their engagement, and we've had great success at keeping the different tribal representatives at our 2 different reserve sites very engaged in what we're doing. And that helps quite a bit.
Yeah, great. I think the point you just made about partnerships and seeing how you can complement each other in your capacities is a really important one as well. Lynn or Megan, do you still have one more question, or do I get to ask another one? We have a couple more minutes. You might be on mute.
Yeah, we do have another one. We just want to make sure we're ready to articulate it here.
Okay, let me give it a shot.
Okay.
Yeah, so other than building trust and meeting partners or end users where they are there other strategies for getting stakeholders, communities especially, to buy in to a program, a project, planning, et cetera, and sustain that momentum?
Any other strategies that you all can think of? Maybe while you guys are thinking, maybe I can offer one of my own. It seems to me that, you know, when you connect to people around, say, a vision of a desirable future that you might be working toward, very often people have a much broader vision than what the project is that you brought them in the door for. So, you know, it might be about a coastal adaptation barrier or whatever, but maybe they want to also fix food systems, or they want to fix something else, right? So the list of desirables is much bigger. And I think one way to keep momentum and bring people in is to actually focus attention on some of the other things along the way. And that could be also a good strategy for when you're waiting for a permit to come in, or when you need something else to engage them with, to come back to some of those items. And Sabrina, I'm thinking also of one of the really fun things you guys have done with the kids and the science flags. I wonder if you want to share, you know, some of those exciting projects and just how that's brought the community in a whole different way than you never had anticipated before.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's partially meeting people where they are, but really understanding what their knowledge systems are or their decision-making frameworks. So I think that physically going to them, being there, being present in the community, and this is one of the biggest values, I think, of the NERRS system, is that we are place-based research, monitoring, and engagement. So we can have these kind of long-term relationships. We can establish our role and our niche in adaptation for our regions that we represent here. But I think that understanding and going to where people are in their decision-making frameworks is really, really important. That's what's been probably most successful for us here, is really starting to work more with like public health officials or with environmental coordinators with tribes, seeing what kind of decisions and what kind of work they already have to be doing, and communicating adaptation and climate change in a way that's really relevant to their mental model or their worldview, and understanding those the ways that you can break down climate impacts so they don't seem too scary, and then you can point out what people are already doing that is adaptive. So that kind of gives you a springboard for future conversations and developing additional strategies to move forward with together.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. Yeah, Stuart.
Well, I think echo just what Sabrina was talking about is that you get caught in these environmental planning processes. You might have a loss of time between milestones, and that can run into these periods of silence, which are can be very problematic. And so flipping that around, and kind of what she was suggesting, is reach out. A lot of communities have a lot of things going on already. There's community groups of all stripes that have events on a regular basis, and folks involved in this work, reach out to them and go to their meetings, ask them what they would like to learn about, show up and do that, and keep that connection going. So it's really that follow through and help them with what they're trying to do, and how the information you're trying to deal with on adaptation fits into both learn from them and bring to them what they're doing. And that creates that opportunity to maintain that connection during these long environmental planning processes, and it's a component of building trust by showing up and they get to know you and seeing who all these different folks are.
Yeah, one of the great assets that you actually are members of your communities, right? You're not just some distant person dropping in, but you're actually part of the community, and building that social capital is really crucial. So we have just 4 minutes left, and I wonder if in 3 minutes of those 4, we can have each of you say one last comment on what you see as maybe the most important step for us collectively within the system, but also with other coastal managers, how we can accelerate learning and action to get to resilience and adaptation a little faster than we have. Lisa, can I start with you?
Sure. I think one thing we can do is do more of things like this. I think we can all learn from each other. We all have lessons we can share. We've all fallen in the pitfall, and we've all figured out how to get out of it. So sharing that is important. And I think while everything is local and there's very local intricacies, so much of the work we do is transferable. So whether the individual details are local, but the process is transferable, I think. So I think sharing more between practitioners, between professionals like we're doing today is a really great step.
Great. Philip, how about you?
Well, my focus here probably today is the more on the big scale cities and such. And so when it comes to adaptation to sea level rise and coastal flooding, there's a lot of work that's going to be getting done at a very large federal sort of scale. So I would just say improving the communication processes in the same way, which are between science and stakeholder communities and the federal government, much like what was done with this NERRS project. I think that's really critical.
Great. Sabrina.
Yeah, I think that what Lisa said about sharing and having platforms to share and develop a community of practice for people who are in this field and are trying to assist these coastal communities to adapt is really key. So I would definitely agree that sharing facilitation tools or stories of what works just to build awareness, capacity, and maybe some creative thinking to meet these challenging climate changes that we're all going to expect.
Wonderful. And Stuart, last thoughts on critical next steps.
Well, I very much echo what Lisa and Sabrina said about really sharing information. We get examples and make sure that we can learn from them. The other big one really is going to your funders, that whoever they may be, bringing them in, educating them so that they're ready to put the money on the table that it will take to get things done, especially those that can fund the very early stages that oftentimes are the hardest, the sort of the early community planning and then the community foundations, and really reaching out to them as part of that process so they know what they should be funding, why they should be doing it, how to go about putting their money to use effectively.
Yeah, that's really important. We should not forget that they're not just decision makers or stakeholders, but there's also people who give the money, right? And that outreach is just as important. So with that, a very big thank you to every one of you, and to you in the audience to throw us some great questions that we could engage with. We're gonna write this up and add it to the management brief, send that out to all of the people who have participated. And so with that, just a really big thank you for sharing your experience with the rest of us. And I turn it back to you, Nick, for whatever you need to do to close us out.
Great, thanks, Susie. And thank you to everybody again for participating. Just a couple quick items to wrap up with before everybody leaves. Please join us for our upcoming panel webinar on designing effective collaborative science projects with moderator Julia Wandalek. We'll be sending out some event reminders in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out. There are 2 written products that accompany today's discussion. There's a management brief that Susie mentioned. If you haven't had a chance to check out the accompanying brief, you can find it on our website at the URL shown. The brief features summaries of the projects mentioned during today's panel and features other projects and reserves working on climate resilience across the reserve system. We will be updating this management brief to include content from today's discussion, and then we will recirculate it after that. There will also be a webinar summary report coming out in the next couple of weeks, which will include responses to any questions we didn't have time to answer. So if you do have the last few questions, feel free to put them into the discussion prompt, and we'll make sure to circulate those to the panelists as well. The summary will also include a list of participants that would like their names added to the roster. So to leave your notes on that, we'll ask you to take a look at the exit survey that'll launch directly after you close the webinar. It'll also be released via email tomorrow around the same time. So please consider adding your name and contact info to that if you'd like to. And we also would welcome your ideas about next steps and potential synergies around this topic. Lastly, there will be a YouTube recording of this video. So we recorded the webinar and it'll be on the Science Collaborative's YouTube channel within the next couple of days as well. And with that, let's give one last big thank you to our participants, and a big thank you to our panelists and our moderator, Susie Moser. Thank you all.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.